We're making apple strudel this week. You need to check it out. We're using apples from Half's Orchard. This is really an easy recipe to make. It just takes a little bit of prep time. But if you want a delicious strudel, this is a good recipe. Isn't that sexy? Okay, so Zach and I went to Half's Orchard and we checked it out. It was great, and I want to come back and I want to make some apple strudels. So they had suggested, instead of using one type of apple, use a mixture of apples. So every bite is a little bit different. Some bites are a little sweeter, some bites are a little more tart, and it just gives you a really well-rounded flavor apple filling. I've been buying apple cider there for years to make my apple cider sorbet, and I didn't realize that they had 40 different varieties. A lot of them from heritage Europe countries, French apples, Belgium apple. The selection is overwhelming, actually. This is a bowl with one of each of them. For this recipe, we're going to need 8 to 10 apples. If you're using small ones, use 2. At the end of the day, we want about 1.5 pound and 3/4 apples. We want around at least 1 pound of sliced finished apples. And before you start peeling and cutting the apples, I want to get the sauce. And now, I'm a fan of cooked apple fillings. I like the way an apple pie setups with a cooked filling. It doesn't run out. It doesn't mean I won't eat a fresh apple pie, but I prefer a cooked apple pie. It's just a lot easier to eat and you get a lot more flavors. So we're going to need a cup of fresh apple juice, which I got from the orchard. We're going to get that on high to bring that to a simmer. And to this, 2/3 of a cup of dark brown sugar. I like to use the dark brown because it gives you a little bit more depth of molasses. 1/4 teaspoon of salt, anytime we make something sweet. And then 1 tablespoon of my pumpkin spice. I only use fresh squeezed lemon. That is a necessity in my cooking. I never pull a bottle of lemon juice out of the refrigerator unless I've squeezed it and put it in that bottle. And usually fresh squeezed lemon juice will last you. We're looking at 2 ounces. That was a nice juicy lemon. Fresh ginger. That just gives us a little bit more of that ginger flavor. And I'm going to cut myself a piece. This is about 2 or 3 ounces. I take a wider knife, closer to the handle, and I just tap it. Okay, if I try to do that right away, it might slip out and fly out. But once I get it to start mashing, I just want to flatten it. Now I've exposed that. I want that in here too. And I'm going to fish that out once this has infused. We're going to keep it on a low heat, okay? And this is going to be our thickener. Need 4 ounces of fresh apple juice, again, from Half's. They're really great. Can you just imagine an apple juice with 40 varieties? It's incredible. I have 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. We'll give this a little stir. As you can see, this is starting to bubble a little bit. What's what we want? We want this liquid to get nice and hot. We want that to extract the ginger flavor out. So now while that's happening, we're going to peel our apples. You can go from top to bottom. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. If you got a little strip of apple skin in there, it's okay. What you want to get is about 98% of it off. Okay, you got something little like that, no big deal. You just pull down and then straight across the bottom. You can use a regular straight potato peeler, use it the same way. I find that if I go from the bottom, it works a little bit easier. And then I can twist the peeler at the end like this. It's just like I'm doing a big C. A little bit of skin is okay. Shows that it was homemade. Now we've got this to a nice low simmer. And we only have to let that ginger go about as long as it takes us to do these apples. And I don't like to cut the apples and put them in lemon water. I like to cut them and use them right when I need them because I don't want them to oxidize. And I don't want to add any water to this recipe. I want this apple pie filling to be really appley, if that's even a word. I don't want to dilute my apple filling. This apple filling is great for Danish. It's great for apple pies. It's great. We're going to make strudel. We're going to roll it in Phyllo today. But, if you made a German pastry dough or puff pastry. You could do an apple turnover. This apple filling recipe is pretty basic. You could put this apple filling on top of a cheesecake when it's lukewarm after it's cooled off and you've made it, and you can put it on top of a cold cheesecake and as a layer on top, and then that'll set up really nicely. You can add golden raisins to the apple mix if you'd like. You can flavor it however you want. You know, you can use just cinnamon or you can use all the spices that I use. I like to use all the spices because it just gives it nice complexity and layers. And when you're peeling these apples, you can notice the difference in colors of the meat and the hardness of the apple, how crisp or soft it is. I don't use the skins for pectin. Okay, so we've got this nicely boiled now. This has gone a couple minutes. We've extracted some nice ginger flavor out of there. See how nice and dark rich it is. And we just pull the ginger out all in one piece like this. Also, what I like to do is I like to cut my apples on my grater, and I like to use the blade end. And I just turn the apple as I go, and I get a nice thin slice that ensures that my apples cook really quickly. You can do this on a mandolin if you want. I wouldn't use the cheese shredder because that's just too fine. I've made it that way before, and it gives you a really fine, you know, if you're looking to make it easy to eat for young children, maybe. But this slice here is really nice and thin, and it does the trick. You know, and as you're doing these apples, you know, and you see one that you don't recognize, you know, you can take a little slice of that. I've never had that. Oh, I couldn't even remember all 40 names, but as I grate, I add my apples to that pot. And I hold on to the core, and I get it down to the seeds. As you can see, there's not a lot of skin, so you don't have to worry about the stuff at the top. You know, if I shave a little bit of it, it's okay. But again, on the cooked filling, I like a pie, when you cut it, the filling stays in the crust. And when you cut a bite with your fork, it stays on your fork. There's people out there that believe that the only way to make an apple pie is to use fresh apples, and that's a good way to do it as well. I just don't like the texture of that pie. It's a little bit too crunchy for me. You know, by the time the apple's all cooked, and it sinks because the apples lose volume as they cook, and you got to make sure you have the right amount of starch to thicken all those juices. So it's guesswork because you don't know what kind of apples you're working with all the time. So it's hard to write a recipe that can accommodate that. Now I'm going to cook these apples in my sugar and seasoning, a little bit of salt, and this is going to reduce down as it cooks. And it's going to cook quickly because you can see how these apples, these slices are nice and thin. And again, this is an apple filling that works great for pastries. It holds up to the heat. When it cools off and sets, it cuts beautifully. We're going to turn the heat on high on that, and we're going to get that going. It's been about 4 or 5 minutes, and look how quickly that happened in less than 10 minutes. The apples have gotten soft, and the mixture is continuing to boil, so that's how we know all the apples are nice and hot, and they have cooked, okay? They're limp. You can break the apple slice, but you can still see them. So now we take our apple cider and our cornstarch slurry, and we mix that in. And it's going to be a little bit thinner than what it's going to look like when it's refrigerated, but we don't want it to be like Jell-O when it's refrigerated. We want it to still have a nice sauciness to it. So now after you've added your cornstarch, it went in here nice and cloudy. And can you see how this is now starting to get shiny and that brown liquid is clear again? It's starting to clear up and it's not clouded anymore. You want to give this a good 1 to 2 minute cook, okay? You want to make sure that that starch is cooked out, because if you don't, it's going to give you that chalky feeling in your mouth. That's a beautiful apple filling. And if you want to add golden raisins to this, I would consider bringing like a half a cup of rum or sweet wine like a sherry or a marsala and reconstitute them before you add them to the apple filling. This is ready. It's done, and we're going to take it out of here and pour it into our pan, and we're going to put a piece of plastic over it so it doesn't get a skin, because it will. If you don't, we're just going to crack the corner a bit so it can steam off and put that in the refrigerator. Okay, so now that we have that filling and we made it in the morning or we made it yesterday, we're going to make apple strudel. And here's one that I made 3 hours ago. Notice how it's set up. It still has some texture, but it's not juicy anymore. Now, what we do is we take our phyllo. The first piece has got to be a nice piece because it's the piece you're putting down and rolling your strudel. Put it like that. We have our butter that's melted. I have one of these brushes with a hook on it, so it doesn't touch the bottom. It's only touching the butter, and we're generous. You know, and we want to do the first one carefully because this is our layer that's going to be exposed, and we want that to be nice and buttery and crispy. And we're going to do 4 layers. You don't really need to have a wet towel on this because you work quickly enough, you know, and if the phyllo breaks, no big deal, you know, you just piece it back on there like so. And then after the first one, you sprinkle butter and then you can spread it. But you want to make sure that phyllo is completely covered. So I like to sprinkle a little bit on, you know, and sometimes this phyllo, because it's so thin, is fragile, but that's okay, you know. You can piece it together. It doesn't need to come off in one sheet. It usually does. And then this is our 4th and final layer. And you have to butter this inside layer too, because as you're rolling it, the outside of the phyllo on the bottom here is dry. So that needs to roll up against butter too. So you're basically just making 8 to 12 layers of butter and phyllo. And if you wanted, you could sprinkle seasoned sugar in between each layer, but that's really not necessary. So when you're done with this, you know, you could also do 4 sheets like this and then take a knife and cut it into 6 squares and then get a muffin tin. I think we should do that, don't you, Zach? So we got muffin tin, 6 squares, and take our butter, make sure we're got a nice buttered base. And take our cut phyllo, we stick it in there like so. We have it up like that and push it into the corners. These are little phyllo apple turnovers. You take your apple filling, you take a nice large spoon, about 2 tablespoons of filling in there, okay? And then you push that phyllo over the top of them like so. And just a little bit more butter for good measure. And to make sure all that dry phyllo gets buttered, and that'll be nice and crispy and delicious. And we'll get this going in a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes. So now, with our strudel, we put the first sheet down, we sprinkle, and we brush lightly. I'm not pressing down hardly at all. I'm just letting the brush drag across the phyllo, and I want to make sure I get all the edges. And I want to go with 4 layers. You know, I tip the pot, because I really don't want the brush to hit that water on the bottom, because the water will make the phyllo gummy, and we just want the oil on there. If you wanted to use a ghee or a clarified butter, you could, but this is old school, just using technique to get what you want without ruining your phyllo. You know, generous with the butter. We want nice, flaky, buttery layers. Phyllo is kind of like newspaper. It'll absorb it really nicely. Okay, we got our last and final layer. And like before, we want to make sure we butter this because this is what's going to get rolled up around the apple filling. The apple filling that I showed you makes enough filling for 2 pies or 3 strudels or the little muffins that we did, 2 batches of that. It's about 12 to 15 portions. Okay, so now we take our apple filling, and for the strudel I use about a cup, maybe a cup and a half. I don't like to overdo it. I like to keep it about 2 inches from the end. And what I'll do is when I roll this, I'm not going to roll it really tight. You know, I'm just going to get it over, you know, and tuck it and make sure. And I go about halfway. All right. Then I fold the ends all the way in like this, and a little more butter because all that dry phyllo needs to have some butter on it to be nice and crispy. And then we just roll it without pressing it or anything. And we put this in a papered sheet pan, And then we brush the whole outside with butter because there's no butter on this phyllo as well. It was our bottom layer. And we make sure we get the sides and we get the ends really well. Also, with these strudels, I like to do is I like to take the point of my Japanese knife and just stick 3 little vents. That's it. You could sprinkle this with sesame seeds. You can sprinkle this with almonds. You can just leave it like that. That's what I'm going to do with this one today. This will bake at 350 for 30 minutes, 35, depending on how hot your oven is running. Now, thankfully, I made one ahead of time. This is what it looks like when it's baked. Cup of powdered sugar and like a tablespoon of apple juice. And you start with a tablespoon. Because if you go too hard, then you're adding sugar, and the next thing you know, you have 5 cups of icing. And really a little bit goes a long way with this icing. Now this icing, you could use apple liqueur, you could use rum or bourbon, you know, whatever your flavor profile you're looking for. And I let this other strudel cool off a little bit before I put the icing on. Otherwise it tends to melt the icing and it doesn't stick. But that's what we're looking for, okay? You take your spoon. See, if that strudel was hot, that icing would just melt and run off, okay? And then you can, you can go back and forth and make a crisscross. It's up to you. All right, and that's your icing. This piece here is for Zach, my cameraman. But look at phyllo's cooked, the layers of butter. Out of a log, you should be able to get 4 pieces. Serve it with a scoop of ice cream. They're very tender and delicate, as you can see.